Good evening, everybody. For those joining on YouTube, those joining on Facebook Live or other social media outlets. The topic tonight, your one shot at life, make it count. We've been doing our Wednesday afternoon study group at 12:30 Pacific time. If you'd like to join us, you could just go to jewishacademy.com and the Zoom link is there. But we've been studying about the final days of Moshe's life and the messages that he delivers to the Jewish people during this time, this very powerful time as he's saying his farewell to the Jewish people. And as we go through these portions and this powerful speech by Moses, we cannot help but be overcome by a profound sense of sadness over the fact that Moses would be leaving this world without realizing his life's greatest hope and dream, and that is of entering the land of Israel. And all this because of one mistake, one slip up, albeit a serious one for a man of Moses' stature. He hit the rock. The scene in which Moses climbs Mount Nebo to see only from a distance the land that he would never enter has got to be one of the most poignant in all of Torah. It leaves us wondering, did it really have to end this way? And why? And I should point out that although this was surely the biggest setback and disappointment Moses had to face at this juncture, it wasn't the only one. By this time, his closest friends and his confidants, including his brother Aaron, the high priest, his sister Miriam, have passed on. It had also become clear that neither of his two sons, Eliezer or Gershom, would be succeeding him. That position was going to go to his disciple Joshua, and Moses already knew that. All these developments had to have hurt. So how does Moses deal with the disappointments? I mean, after all the pleading and the praying, once it becomes absolutely clear that God would not be changing his mind about the Israel decree, how does Moses react to this discovery of the drastically turned pages and the new trajectory of his life? The answer is that he reinvents himself yet again. He uncovers yet another layer of his tremendous potential. You see, all throughout the book of Deuteronomy, we hear Moses not simply articulating and conveying God's laws, but explaining the deep theology, the philosophy behind them. He speaks with incredible passion about God's love for the Jewish people and the love that Israel should show God. He reviews past events and he braces all of us for future challenges. He's no longer Moses the liberator. He's no longer Moses the miracle worker. He becomes Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher. Moses, our teacher. You might say that in those last months, Moses climbed his second mountain. He found a whole new voice and a whole new purpose. He provided insights not only to the people of that generation, but to all generations to come, so that when we are sitting here in the year 2020, we're reading his words of the book of Deuteronomy, we are so moved, we're so inspired by this man's passion, by his inspiration. You see, he made them and he made all of us his disciples. And we've all been his disciples ever since. It was perhaps that second mountain, atop that second mountain, that Moses achieved his greatest legacy of all, after the setbacks. My friends, the truth is that we all hit those crossroads wherein we suddenly were faced with new circumstances, new challenges, new realizations into our own lives. And when that happens, we can choose to ignore it. We can run away from it. We can become bitter about it, or we can do something else altogether with it. We can choose to embrace it. We can make a conscious decision to climb that second mountain in life. And guess what? you may very well find that it's on the peak of that second mountain of your life that your greatest treasures will be found. Some of you may recall the name of Stephen Sotloff. He was an American journalist who in the year 2013 was kidnapped in Syria. He was held captive by ISIS for 13 months until he was brutally executed in one of those gruesome beheading videos. In a letter smuggled out by his former cellmate, Sotloff put down on paper some of the thoughts he wanted conveyed to his family. And a cousin read his words to the thousands of mourners who attended his memorial service in Pinecrest, Florida. He wrote, "Live your life to the fullest. Everyone has two lives. The second one begins when you realize you only have one." I'll read it again, try to catch it. Everyone has two lives. The second one begins when you realize that you only have one. His point is that sometimes we tend to live our lives as if it's going to go on forever. But then there comes that point where we wake up and we realize we only have one shot at this. For some of this can happen early in life. For others, perhaps at a midpoint in life. For others, still maybe much, much later. But inevitably, all thinking people get to that point of stark realization. It is when that finally happens that we start focusing less on our external accomplishments and more on our internal accomplishments, less on the resume virtues and more on the legacy virtues. It's when we hear an inner voice saying, "I want to do something really, really good with my life." There was this teenage boy who once put a question to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He asked the Rebbe, "Do we Jews believe in reincarnation? Do we believe in reincarnation?" The Rebbe's answer was short and cryptic. "Yes, we do believe in reincarnation, but don't wait until then." A puzzling response. What did the Rebbe mean, don't wait until then? The kid asked a simple question: do we believe or don't we believe in something? You see, beyond addressing the technical question, the Rebbe was discerning where the question was coming from. The kid wanted to know if this lifetime is all there is, or is there more? The possibility of reincarnation can change how we look at life now, because we may be coming back. So we'll get another chance. We'll finish any unfinished business the next time around. We'll get a do-over. Or in golf lingo, we'll get a mulligan. We'll just do it again. And this was what the Rebbe was trying to warn the young man. Reincarnation does not mean procrastination. Don't put off to your next life what you need to achieve in this life. Yes, we believe in the re-embodiment of the soul, and we believe in second chances. But for all you know, this life may already be your second chance. So live this life as if it's your last. This fellow made Aliyah to Israel and was still getting used to the new bureaucracy. One day he receives a very strongly worded second notice from the Israeli tax authority saying that his taxes are overdue. He runs down in panic to the tax office and he pays the bill, and then he begins to apologize, explaining he must have accidentally overlooked the first notice. He's sorry. The tax collector smiles and says, "Oh, the Israeli tax authority doesn't send out first notices. We have found that the second notices are much more effective, so we go straight for the second notice." Let's live our lives as if we are on the second notice. What does that mean? It means living in the pursuit of meaning. As Americans, we place a premium on the pursuit of happiness, as well we should. But the irony is that you don't usually find happiness by pursuing happiness. What was it that John Lennon said? Life happens while you're busy making other plans. Well, one can say true happiness happens when you're busy pursuing something else. And that something else is finding meaning in life. What's the difference? What's the difference between happiness and meaning? Well, for one thing, happiness is largely about satisfying needs and wants. Meaning is all about purpose. Right here, right now. Meaning is about how you judge your life as a whole, the past, the present, the future. Happiness is about taking, meaning is about giving. Or in the words of Viktor Frankl, the way to find meaning is not to ask what we want from life. Instead, we should ask what life wants from us. Life is a task. And the religious person, says Viktor Frankl, experiences existence not simply as a task, but as a mission. He or she is aware that they're being summoned by a source, and that source is God. We read in the Torah about God summoning people all the time to carry out specific missions. He tells Abraham to go here. He tells Moses to go there. He tells Samuel to do this. He tells Jonah to do that. The voice of God is giving very specific instructions as to where and when the mission is. But what about in our post-prophecy days, when we don't hear God's voice? At least most of us don't. How do we know what our calling is? How do we know what our mission is meant to be? And the answer I can best say to you is that when you come upon it, and you're tuned into it, you'll know. You'll just know. A number of years ago, there was a strange anomaly in the weather back east. There was a terrible snowstorm. It hit the New York area in the month of March. It was such a huge storm that the trash collection trucks couldn't get through until the storm stopped and the snow was plowed. Finally, after a number of days of overflowing trash cans, the sanitation trucks started rolling again, working all hours of the day and the night to catch up on the backlog. In fact, it was at 2 a.m. that Rabbi Kalman Epstein in the Kew Garden section of Queens, New York, hears the sanitation trucks rumbling in the distance. And he realizes that he didn't put his own trash cans out, and it's overflowing. And if he misses this, oy vey, it's going to be who knows how much longer, and where is he going to put all this trash? So at 2 a.m., he gets up, he runs outside, and he's schlepping the garbage pails to the street so that the garbage collector should be able to collect it. As Rabbi Epstein is schlepping his cans out, one of the men of the sanitation department comes up to him and says, "Excuse me, are you a rabbi?" It's 2 a.m. Are you a rabbi? After Rabbi Epstein confirmed that he was, the man told him that his mother just passed away a few hours before. And he hasn't even told his siblings yet. And his dilemma was that he knew that they wanted to have her cremated. Their father had a proper Jewish burial in the Jewish cemetery, and he believed that his mother wanted a similar send-off as well. But in the recent weeks when his mother was already in a coma, he overheard talk amongst the siblings about, well, you know what, let's do it a different way this time. It's easier, it's faster, it's less expensive. And so he's telling this to Rabbi Epstein. He says, my mother wasn't religious, but I can tell you that she lit the Shabbat candles every Friday night. And I feel that this is what she would want. So what do you think I should do? Rabbi Epstein recommended that the man call a Jewish funeral home. He gave him a phone number of a friend that he knew that worked in that particular Jewish funeral home. He said, you can call him now. It's okay to call him in the middle of the night. Set everything up with him already before. And in the morning, you'll call your siblings, inform them about the mom's passing, but tell them that they don't have to worry about any arrangements because everything is already under control. Everything has been already taken care of. And presented with the circumstances of everything having been taken care of, they won't mind so much and they'll go along with it. He gave the man the name, the phone number, the cell number of this particular funeral director, told him, mention my name, tell him Rabbi Kalman Epstein told you to call in the middle of the night. I want him to take care of things. I want him to make it as least costly as possible. I want him to take care of all of the preparations that are needed, everything. And sure enough, the next morning, this man whose name was Theodore, yet the other fellows called him Pip, he calls the rabbi and he says, you know, you were so right. I made all the arrangements. I called your friend. He took care of everything. And then I called my siblings. They weren't upset at all. In fact, the funeral is in a few hours. And then Pip said, Rabbi Epstein, You are the only rabbi I know, even though we just met. Do you think you can come officiate and speak at the funeral? Rabbi Epstein readily agreed. Although the cemetery was on Long Island, there was about an hour and a half drive from Kew Gardens. Rabbi Epstein was glad to do the mitzvah. And this woman received a proper Jewish burial with dignity and with honor. He's driving back from the funeral. Rabbi Epstein reflected on the phenomenon of a person reaping what they sow in life. That because this woman had a feeling for Judaism, that she lit a Shabbos candle every Friday night, that sent a message to her son that Jewish tradition is important to me. And because of that, he couldn't accept the fact that the siblings wanted to cremate her. And because of that, when he saw someone that looked like a rabbi, he opened his heart. The following week, the sanitation truck comes rolling down Rabbi Epstein's street. He went out, he wanted to see his friend Pip, but he didn't see him amongst the crew. And he approached the other men and he said, where is Pip today? They said, Pip doesn't work for us here. Pip, he works in Long Island. He never comes here. Last week was the only time he served this particular area because we were all backed up and we needed overtime of people. So he was here, but he's never on this shift. So that one particular time, because of a snowstorm, because of overtime needed, because he was going down the street, because Rabbi Epstein forgot to take his trash cans out, there was a mission there. And he knew it. He knew that he needed to be there for this fellow. So that this woman, because of her love for Jewish tradition, that she would have a proper Jewish burial. So how do we know what we're being called up to? How do we know when we're being asked to perform a mission? The answer is that God has his way of putting us where we need to be, when we need to be, and shows us this is what's needed of you. So when we see a need that needs to be met, or we see a wrong that needs to be righted, or a pain that needs to be healed, and we feel it's speaking to us, that is when we come as close as we can in this post-prophetic era to hearing the voice of God summoning us to action. The very fact that you see it and feel it the way you do means that you have the distinct ability to do something about it. So here's a question for you. Think about this scenario. If you put an envelope with $1 million in a homeless person's cart, but the homeless person doesn't realize that it's there, doesn't know that it's there, is he rich or is he poor? Likewise, if you have thousands of gifts, you have talents, and you have blessings in your life, but you're too busy, distracted, or depressed to pay attention to them, do you or do you not have those gifts? Well, technically speaking, the homeless person with the $1 million envelope is rich. He has $1 million. And you still have thousands of gifts. But if you don't look inside the envelope, you can't use what you have. It's time for each and every one of us to open our envelopes and look inside. The first step to living a truly meaningful, fulfilling, and yes, happy life is knowing and appreciating the awesome treasures that we already possess. Each of us is unique. Even genetically identical twins are different. We've each been endowed by God with enormous potential. Each stage of life reveals more, not less, of what we have to offer. Sure, it may be different. What you're able to do in your 40s may not be the same as you were able to do in your 20s. And in your 70s, it may not be the same as you were able to do in your 50s, but not any less important and not any less impactful. In fact, often it's far more significant. As long as we're alive, there's always more within us waiting to be unearthed and put to good use. Likewise, each of our children have their own unique envelopes filled with riches waiting to be opened and tapped into. And it's incumbent upon us to enable them to do that. And not just our own children. If we recognize special talents and capabilities within someone else's child, and we can help nurture them or mentor or develop their talent to its potential, then the sense of joy and gratification we would derive from that effort can be as great for us as it is for them. Years ago, there was a 13-year-old boy. His name was Ovadia. And Ovadia was studying in the yeshiva in Israel, where he was proving himself to be quite the student of Torah. Perhaps that's why the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the school, Rabbi Ezra Atiyah, was surprised when one day the young man didn't show up for classes, and the next day he didn't show up again, and the next. A few days go by and he's not there. He's worried that he might be ill, so Rabbi Ezra decides to pay a visit to the boy's home. He approaches the rundown home and he notices that even for this very poor part of Jerusalem, this house looked pretty shabby. He knocks on the door. The boy's father, Yaakov, comes to the door, and he's shocked. And he's a little bit embarrassed. The Rosh Yeshiva himself had come all the way to their house. To what do we owe this honor? So Rabbi Ezra explains, your son hasn't been in school the last few days. I've been concerned. So his father, Avadia's father, whose name was Yaakov, said, what can I do? What can I do? I have a little grocery store. I have some merchandise there. That's what I have. I earn a living, and I need help in my grocery store, and I can't afford to hire outside help. And my son's a good worker. So I told him until we get through this financial difficulty, he's going to have to take off from yeshiva and come work for me. Rabbi Ezra listened patiently, but then explained to the man that, your son has such an acumen for Torah study, such talent shouldn't be allowed to go to waste. You have to send him back to the yeshiva. And Rabbi Yaakov says, I'm sorry, I have no choice. You don't understand. I can't afford to hire anyone. No one's going to work for free, so I need my son in the store. Unable to persuade him otherwise, Rabbi Ezra thanked Yaakov for his time. As he was walking out the house, he noticed the young student standing in the corner of the room, visibly heartbroken that Rabbi Ezra did not succeed in convincing his father to send him back to yeshiva where he really wanted to be. The next morning, Yaakov, the shopkeeper, enters the store. He enters at his usual time. He puts on his apron. He gets ready for work. But when he looks over the counter to say good morning to his son, who had the responsibility of opening the store, it wasn't his son that was there. Instead, standing there at the counter was Rabbi Ezra Atiyah, and he was wearing an apron. And Yaakov's jaw dropped. He said, Kavod Arav, honorable Rabbi, what are you doing here? Why are you wearing that apron? So Rabbi Ezra replied that I came early and I found my beloved student preparing for his day's work. And I told Ovadia that he can go to yeshiva because I was able to find someone willing to work without pay to take his place. You need someone to stock your shelves? I'm your man. I'm at your service. Just show me where the boxes are, where I need to put it, which shelf I should put it on. I'll get to work. I would rather be here stocking your shelves and seeing your son Ovadia in the yeshiva. So I'm your man. It won't cost you a penny. Just tell me what to do. Try as Yaakov did. He could not get Rabbi Ezra to take off that apron. Until you can afford to pay someone to take my place, I'm staying here. But your son stays in yeshiva. He continues learning. And that's what happened. Ladies and gentlemen, the boy Ovadia of my story grew up to become none other than Chacham Ovadia Yosef, Olav Shalom, the former Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel. You never know if your son can be the next chief rabbi or leader of a community, if your neighbor's child can be the next Jonas Salk or Margaret Thatcher, or if the kid down the street can become the next ambassador to Israel or the United States Secretary of State. And you will never know the greatness that you are capable of achieving if you don't take the time to look inside the envelope and invest the wealth with which you've been blessed. So we need to take stock. We need to scrutinize our values, our priorities, and remind ourselves that we have only this one life, and we need to make it count each and every single day. It's time to look ourselves in the mirror and ask some very basic questions like, who am I? And how is this world better? Because I'm present in it. They tell the story that Albert Einstein was once traveling from Princeton on the train when the conductor came down the aisle, punching the tickets of every passenger. When he came to Albert Einstein, the professor reached into his vest pocket, and he couldn't find a ticket. He checked his pants pocket, his briefcase, the seat beside him, couldn't find it. So the conductor says, "Look, Dr. Einstein, I know who you are. We all know who you are. I'm sure you bought a ticket. I trust you. Don't worry about it." And Albert Einstein nodded in appreciation. The conductor continued down the aisle punching tickets. As he was ready to move to the next car, he turns around and he sees that the great professor is down on his hands and knees and he's looking under his seat still for his ticket. So the conductor rushed back and said, "Dr. Einstein, I told you, you don't have to worry. It's not a problem. I know who you are and I trust you." To which Einstein replied, "Young man, I too know who I am. What I don't know is where I'm going." So the greatest mind boarded a train that couldn't remember where he was headed. Sometimes you can be the master of the greatest theories and ideas and still not be sure of where you're going. So we need to take that long look, not only who we are, but also where are we going? Because I think that in our heart of hearts, each of us know that we're capable of more and we're capable of better. In a practical sense, let's start with some basics. Perhaps we can give a little more thought to the way we treat others, how we speak to strangers, how we speak to family members. Let's learn how to smile a little more and appreciate a little more those daily moments of joy that come our way. Perhaps we can divert just a little attention away from our iPhones and smartphones towards the people in our lives who need us most. Let's try to pay more compliments to our spouses, to others. Let's exercise a little more patience, some tolerance, forgiveness, forbearance. Let's not rush our kids or grandkids along for the sake of some peace and quiet, when in the process we're probably missing out on life's sweetest moments. Let's try to step out more from behind our own difficulties, to give of our time, of our energy, of our resources to others. In the words of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, there is no greater cure for depression, no greater cure for burnout and aimlessness than bringing happiness into the lives of others. Even during this pandemic, or should I say especially during this period of time, there are so many that can use your help, your guidance, your charity. During the Holocaust, a man by the name of Dov Lichtberg lost everyone he was close to and everything he had owned. And after the war, he spent time bouncing around from place to place, from city to city, until he ended up in Paris, France. It was there that he and his new wife tried to rebuild their lives. However, there was a serious problem. Reb Dov, as he was known in his hometown, had no way of supporting the family. He didn't speak French. He didn't know how to present himself in a way that would entice a prospective employer to hire him. Before the war, he was this Torah scholar. Reb Dov held a respectful position in the community. He was a rabbi in a very beautiful congregation. But here he is in Paris, and none of them seemed to matter. He felt out of place, out of sorts, drifting from job to job, with nothing to show for his efforts. Fortunately, he had a friend. His friend's name was Rabbi Gad Eisner. They called him Rab Gadol. And Rab Gadol was known, he had this deep empathy for Reb Dov, and he wanted to help his friend find a job, a fitting job, an honorable job. He understood that his friend just needed a break, just to get on his feet. Rav Gadol went around asking to see if anyone had anything or knew of anything. Despite his best efforts, he came up empty-handed. Finally, someone told him about a job, but it wasn't exactly the kind of position he hoped to find for his friend. It was a job as the shul janitor, the janitor of the synagogue. Upon further investigation, Rav Gadol discovered that the job included cleaning the bathrooms, mopping the floors, wiping down the walls, getting rid of the trash. It included also some tasks normally designated for the shamish of the shul, to organize the holy books, putting the books in the proper shelves, rolling the Torah scroll to the proper place, putting the tables and chairs in order. Knowing that his friend had no other options, Rav Gadol accepted the position on his behalf. He said, yes, I have someone for you who'll take the job. And he came to Reb Dov, and with a big smile on his face, he said, I have great news for you. I found you a job. Oh, Reb Dov was overjoyed. A huge burden was suddenly lifted off his shoulders. And may I ask what the job entails? It's a position in a big synagogue. Really? Wow. What's the position? You're going to be the rabbi of the synagogue. Wow, the rabbi of the synagogue. That's right. They need a rabbi. I told them all about you. They're hiring you as the rabbi of the synagogue. But you know, in this place in Paris, they don't want the type of rabbi like from where we're from. They don't want the rabbi who gives speeches and classes and answers questions. No. Here they have a different type of rabbi. The president of the shul wants people to learn from the rabbi simply by observing his behavior. You want that the rabbi should pray and study, and people should see that, and they're going to want to conduct themselves that way. It's inspiration by role model rabbi. It's a great job for you. What do you say? Reb Dov could hardly contain his excitement. Wow, I don't have to teach. I don't have to make speeches. And yet I'm the rabbi of the congregation just by being a role model. Wow, I just be me and I have a job and they pay me. He jumped for joy. He couldn't stop thanking Rav Gadol for the referral, for the recommendation, for getting the job. But now we have a problem. What about the fact that the president was in fact looking for a janitor? He wanted someone to clean the shul. He wanted someone to clean the bathrooms. He wanted shiny floors. He wanted a neat and functional sanctuary. Well, from the first day onwards, Reb Dov, from the first day that Reb Dov went onto this job, his friend Rav Gadol got up 4:30 in the morning. He went to the synagogue. He mopped the floors. He cleaned the toilets. He tidied up the sanctuary. He took out the trash. He did everything that a janitor would need to do. All this to preserve the honor and the dignity of a broken soul. This went on for months, and no one was the wiser for it. Reb Dov served as the rabbi, while the cleaning duties were covered by Rav Gadol. To keep up the charade, Rav Gadol did everything in his power to minimize contact between Reb Dov and the president, who was the janitor's boss, lest the secret be revealed. One day, however, crisis struck. After the morning prayers, the president approaches Reb Dov and asks to have a word with him. It happened before Rav Gadol could run interference. He didn't know what to do. It appeared that the cat was out and about to be let out of the bag here. As the president spoke to Reb Dov, he detailed the various areas that he felt needed to be cleaned more thoroughly. He insisted that certain things should be done on Monday morning, not on Tuesday morning, and Reb Dov is nodding his head with this blank expression. By the time Rav Gadol made his way over to his friend Reb Dov, it seemed as if the damage had already been done. He braced himself for his friend being upset with him for having hooked him up with a job to be a glorified janitor. So what did he want from you, Rav Gadol asks Reb Dov. Reb Dov answered, Ich weiß nicht. In Yiddish, that means I don't know. I don't speak French. Breathing a sigh of relief, Rav Gadol ran over to the president and he said, Reb Dov didn't quite understand all of your instructions. Can you perhaps repeat it to me? And the Rabbi gave him the updated cleaning instructions, to which Rav Gadol replied, I'll see that it's taken care of. How's that for kindness? How's that for sensitivity? Not only providing meaningful help and support, but preserving a man's dignity in the process. That's a tzedakah. That's a mitzvah. That's a cure for our own depression and our own sadness, when we can do so much for someone else. There's a fellow in Los Angeles, his name is David Stauber, he's an attorney in Los Angeles. He was raised in a religious home. But by the time he went to college in the 1960s, he had lost all interest in Judaism. Between the rebellious culture of the 60s and the general sense of skepticism, he was happy to leave it all behind. When he got married, his wife Jackie, they kept a kosher home, but that was her desire, not his. After he graduated from law school, David and his wife took a trip to Europe. And while touring Greece, they were in a terrible car accident. Jackie's back was broken, and she became semi-paralyzed. When she was transferred to Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, Chabad's Rabbi Shlomo Kunin urged her to write to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which she did. And she got an immediate response and a blessing. And in fact, from that point on, she kept on corresponding with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who gave her constant spiritual encouragement and guidance. 6 months later, after finishing her rehabilitation, Jackie wanted very much to see the Rebbe in New York. And even though the doctors discouraged her from making the trip, they went. This was back in 1973. So they're waiting outside the Rebbe's office. And someone tells David that it's customary to write a note to the Rebbe and you put down your request. And then once inside, you hand the Rebbe the note as an introduction, and the Rebbe will respond to what you wrote. So David tells the fellow that's telling him about the tradition and the custom, he says, I have no requests. There's nothing that I want from the Rebbe. As far as he is concerned, I'm just here to accompany my wife. This is her thing. It's her relationship. I just came along for the ride. Other than that, I'm a bystander. I'm sitting in the back. There's no need for me to write anything. But the man was persistent, and he said, no, it's the right thing to do. He handed him a few sheets of paper. He says, here, write. So he took one sheet of paper, and he wrote one line. And this is what he wrote. If God is so great, why does he insist on all these tiny details? This is what always bothered him. That God seems stuck on small, trivial matters. That it somehow upsets this infinite God if you miss one little thing. Or that this infinite God cares if you use a meat spoon and some cottage cheese. Anyway, they come into the Rebbe's room and he hands the Rebbe his note. And the Rebbe greets them very warmly. And first he spoke to Jackie for a while about her situation. And then the Rebbe turned to David. And the Rebbe said, I don't understand your question. Thinking perhaps that the Rebbe didn't understand English, so he started to repeat the question in Yiddish, which he remembered from his youth. But the Rebbe stopped him in mid-sentence. The problem wasn't the language. And the Rebbe put up his hand and he said, it's not for God, it's for us. God wants us to be close to him. And this is the path he gives us to get close to him. As the Rebbe proceeded to patiently explain, it started becoming clear to David that God wants the closeness of a relationship with us. God is not looking to intimidate us, to frighten us, to control us. God wants to give us a path to him. And he says, follow this path and you'll find me. And you'll find meaning. And you'll find purpose. And you'll find joy in your lives. For David at that time, it was a radical idea. The Judaism that he had been exposed to seemed to be saying that God wants subservience, not love. That we have to conform our conduct in order to avoid God's wrath, to avoid God's punishment. To hear it suddenly framed so differently, that God loves us, that God wants us to be close to him, it intrigued him. And as he put it, I felt as though I had been in a dark room and the Rebbe suddenly turned on the light. Thereafter, he too began an extensive correspondence with the Rebbe, who always responded to his questions. In subsequent years, even as doctors suggested that it would be impossible for Jackie to give birth, the Rebbe blessed them and insisted otherwise. The couple would have 3 sons and 2 daughters, who have since given them many grandchildren, Kenai Nahara. Friends, this is a perspective for all of us. The mitzvahs are not there to give us a hard time. They're not there to stifle us, to restrict us, to crimp our style. They are there to elevate us. They're there to enrich us. A mitzvah is the physical embodiment of God's love for us and our love for Him. The greatest reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. That doesn't mean that it's always easy. Oftentimes it's not. But then again, how many really good things in life can you identify that come without struggle and without toil? Take Shabbat, for example. Keeping Shabbat properly may seem like a mountain, but it's actually a smooth riding elevator that takes us to new heights. If Shabbat had not been created, someone would have made a fortune discovering it and marketing it. Even non-Jews today are craving it and embracing it. Because what Shabbat is it's the one-day miracle vacation that has the power to strengthen a marriage, to celebrate family, to make you part of a community, to allow you to rejoice in what you have, rather than worrying about what you don't yet have. It relieves us from the tyranny of smartphones. It reduces stress. It banishes the pressures of work, and it renews our appetite for life. On top of that, you get some really good food. In the days when the shuls are over, sometimes you get a good sermon, sometimes some great singing, some beautiful rituals. And you don't need to catch a plane or book tickets in advance. It's a gift from God via Moses, and for more than 3,000 years, it has been the Jewish private island of happiness. We marked a year ago the 50th anniversary since the momentous event of July 20th, 1969, when astronauts Neil Armstrong and Ed Aldrin became the first humans to ever land on the moon. 6.5 hours later, Neil Armstrong became the first person to walk on the moon. And as he took his first steps, he said that famous line, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Those words, heard by over 600 million listeners around the world, went on to become perhaps the most famous quote of the 20th century. I think there's such an important message in that statement. Namely, that our giant leaps are really our small steps. Big jumps of transformation can only occur with small, consistent strides. How did man get to the moon? Did NASA just decide one day to fly to the moon and suddenly a week later it happened? Or did it take years and years and years of small successes and preparation? How does man or mankind do anything great? Do we ever just take a giant leap in order to get somewhere? Or do we go little by little, step by step? The same is certainly in the study of Torah and the observance of mitzvot and the observance of Yiddishkeit. You can't go from ground zero and try to rocket ship to the moon overnight. It's small but steady steps, but eventually they become giant leaps. You start with a few classes and you go from there. You'll find that learning Torah exercises your mind. It keeps you young. It will stretch your soul. It will give you strength. Changing our habits ought to be a gradual process, and we should be careful not to undertake more than we can handle, but do something. Do that small step. Take that next step. Take on that next mitzvah. Each exercise movement helps build your body's health. Small snowflakes add up to feet of snow, and small bricks end up building an entire house. And seconds add up to minutes, and minutes become hours. Each dollar of charity keeps a cause alive. Each phone call to a lonely person makes that person feel needed and loved. Every small step indeed creates the giant leaps of life. The key is to put that second mountain into view and to start climbing. Not every expedition will be a success. There will be setbacks. There will be failures along the way. There's times in which you may fall back into some of your old habits. This doesn't mean that you should give up or that your attempts were all for naught, because tomorrow is another day and you get back up again and you try again. And so, as sad and as confounded as we may be, by the fact that Moses was denied entry into Israel, in showing us that even the greatest Jew who ever lived did not live to see his mission completed. The Torah is giving us a profound lesson, a powerful reminder that we are all mortal and must therefore make every day count. We are all fallible and must therefore learn to grow from each mistake. None of us will necessarily complete the journey and must therefore inspire others to continue what we began. For each of us, there will be a river that we will not cross. For each of us, there will be a promised land that we will not enter. For each of us, there will be a destination that we will not reach. Even the greatest life is an unfinished symphony. We shouldn't feel guilty. We shouldn't feel frustrated, angry, or defeated that there are things that we hoped to achieve but did not. At the same time, that doesn't release us from doing our utmost to be the best human being and the best Jew that we can possibly be every day that we are blessed to have a breath of life within us. And perhaps above all, let us learn from Moses that when our circumstances or options change, we have to be able to shift gears, to reinvent ourselves if need be, and climb that second mountain. Because chances are it is within that climb that we will reach our highest heights and achieve our greatest legacies of all. There was a rabbi who passed away at a relatively young age. His wife was beset by terrible grief until she found a small paper on which her husband had written the following. He wrote, "A long life is not good enough, but a good life is long enough." True goodness is not measured by the length of our years, but by how we live those years. It's not about what we amass, but what we give. It's not about having more. It's about being more. And I conclude with one final story. It's about an American-born woman now living in Israel. Her name is Amuna Ben Gera. Although she had a totally secular upbringing, when she was in her 20s, she took a trip to India, which proved to be a turning point in her life. Visiting with her grandfather, with whom she had a very close relationship, she told him that she met a man and she's going to marry him. Grandpa Herbie, who was this salt of the earth United States Army veteran, raised his eyebrows, looked at her and said, "You met the man you're going to marry in India?" She said, "Yep, that's right." "He's an Indian?" Amuna, who then went by the name Evelyn, laughed, enjoyed the ribbing they were giving each other. And she said, "No, Gramps, we met in India, but he's an Israeli." "Israeli as in Jewish?" "Yes, he's Jewish, Grandpa. In fact, his name is Moshe. And here's the kicker. We're going to settle in Israel. We're making Aliyah. We're moving to Israel where we're going to live a Torah-observant lifestyle." Amuna and Moshe did indeed get married. And they grew together in their spiritual values, and they established a Torah-observant home in Israel. Although her family back in America was dubious, they tried not to give Evelyn too hard of a time. Of course, that didn't stop Grandpa Herbie from leveling his clever teases and cynical jabs whenever he had the chance. Tough as nails on the outside, but a teddy bear on the inside, he knew how to give his granddaughter a run for her money. 3 years into their marriage, Amuna and her husband came for a visit from Israel with their infant son. Sitting next to her grandfather in her brother's kitchen, eating kosher food from the kosher pots that they schlepped along, she tried to keep everything light and normal. They sat together in silence until her grandpa turns to Amuna and says, "You know, kiddo, I'm really proud of you." "You're proud of me? Really? Why?" You see, until that point, she felt as though she had been apologizing to her family for everything. And there was her grandpa saying, "I'm proud of you." And he said, "I'm going to tell you something now that I've never told anyone before. I never even told this to my own son, your father. Evelyn always knew there was some mystery surrounding her grandfather's childhood that no one seemed to know, but now she was about to get the scoop. Grandpa Herb spoke about his youth of poverty, growing up in Brooklyn during the Great Depression. It wasn't easy, especially with parents who didn't speak English. His parents had come from Poland, and he was the first son in the family, the first child born in America. And despite the poverty and despite the hardship, he attended a yeshiva where he proved himself to be an excellent student of the Talmud. Evelyn's eyes opened wide as she tried to reconcile the image of her gritty army sergeant grandpa with that of a yeshiva bacher. She was flabbergasted. She never knew this about him. Continuing his story, he spoke of the lack of warmth and joy he felt in his own home. They would go through the motions of ritual observance, but there was no flavor. There was no passion. There was no curiosity. There was no questioning about anything. And as soon as he was old enough, he enlisted in the army, where most of his friends weren't Jewish, and eventually left the way of his fathers. For years, there was no communication with his parents except for one visit when Herb's son, Evelyn's dad, was born. The next time he saw his parents was at their funerals. And Herb continued, "Now I look at you and Moshe, and I see you observing Judaism with all of your heart. You feel it, you practice it with such sincerity, with such passion. This is not what I saw growing up. There's something about the way you're embracing it that touches me so deeply. I can't put it into words other than to say, I am just so proud of you." Tears welled up in Amuna's eyes. She had totally not expected that. Her long, teasing, gruff and tough grandpa was proud of her for being religious. It allowed her a special moment to be proud of herself, instead of trying to prove that she wasn't a weirdo or that her husband wasn't brainwashing her. That little conversation, Amuna would later write, was a gift I hold in my heart, a tiny box I occasionally open. And when I look inside, I see light streaming out, and I feel that my path even more and more makes so much sense. 3.5 years after that visit, Amuna and Moshe were expecting their third child. Due any day, her father calls and says, "My daughter, Grandpa isn't well. You should talk to him now." She got on the phone, and in a very weak voice, Herb said, "Please pray for me. Please pray for me." Despite his condition, his response, Evelyn says to Grandpa, "Grandpa, I'll pray for you, but you can pray too. God will listen to you too." And despite his condition, his response was so quick and sharp. "Don't you preach to me, young lady." And she touched the raw nerve. So she dropped the conversation, and she sent him an email. And she asked her father to read the email to his father, to her grandfather. And this is what the email said. "Dear Grandpa, I want you to know that I love you and that you've been such a big influence in my life. I know you asked me not to preach to you, but will you please do me just one little favor? One favor for your chutzpahdik granddaughter. Please, please say the Shema. Just once. I love you." From his bed, Herb asked that the letter be read to him again and again. And he cried, and he cried, and he cried some more. And he asked that a rabbi be called. And he told the rabbi he wanted to recite the Shema. Then Herb asked everyone else to leave the room, and he wanted to be alone with the rabbi for a while. Nobody else knows what was said in that room, but when the rabbi stepped out, he was shaken up. His eyes were red with tears. Later that week, Amuna gave birth to her third son in Jerusalem. She called her grandfather to say Mazel Tov. He could no longer talk, but he was able to clap his hands and applaud the news. And the next day, he passed away at the age of 83. Amuna Ben Gera writes as follows: Every morning I take out my siddur, my prayer book, and I turn the frayed pages, talking to God. I turn page after page until I get to page 83, the age of when my grandfather left this world. On page 83 in my siddur is the page of the Shema. And as I say the words, I think of my grandfather and the nachas his soul is hopefully receiving from his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren, and how the full circle has been closed. My friends, one of the many beautiful things about Judaism is that it's never too late. The door is always open. One can always come back home, even in the very last moments. But to paraphrase what the Rebbe said to that teenage boy, yes, there may be other chances, but don't wait until then. Do it now. Thank you very much.